Welcome everyone. I've opened the chat, so keep your eye on there, and you can answer us when we have questions, things like that. Let me just share my slides. Okay. Today we're going to be talking about teaching to the information gap. I'm joined here by my colleague Ruth Murren, and let's have a look. So just remember that all the information from these slides will be in the handout, which you'll receive in the next few days. If not tomorrow, it will be on Monday. And you'll also receive a certificate of participation. If you don't find that, check your spam. But if it's not there by Monday evening, send me an email at Formazione. Okay. There's a lot of important information there, including some links that are not in the webinar slides. Okay. Anyway, with the when we talk about, sorry, I think Ruth is going to talk.
That's okay.
Right?
Okay, hello everybody. So we're going to talk about the information gap, which is a key concept in making language classes interactive and engaging for students. So basic concept is that one student has some information that the other one needs, okay? And the only way to get this information is to communicate, ideally using English, the target language. And in this way, we can let students work together in pairs or groups and be sure that they are motivated to communicate. They will have to use the information that they collect in some way to complete a worksheets, to explain to the class. We're also going to give them a purpose to use that information that they're going to collect.
Yeah, I think this is important too. We're not just saying, like, okay, you two can talk together about your favorite films. That might be the first step in it. But I think, as you'll see, we're going to be talking about the fact that, after that, they're going to have to be telling the class about their partner's film or whatever. Okay.
So the objectives today will be that we hope that by the end of this session, teachers will be better able to identify the key principles and stages of information gap activities and their role in fostering authentic communication in the FL classroom. Secondly, motivate students by incorporating fun and culturally relevant scenarios into language gap activities. And also adapt information gap activities to promote specific language skills such as speaking, listening, and vocabulary building.
Okay, so the one question might be, why are we going to use the information gap? Okay, so this use of the information gap activities, it's important because it encourages the real life use of English. It mimics how students really might need to use English in the future or any other language you're teaching them. So one case in real life is where I need directions or advice or prices. Someone else has that information and I need to ask them for that information. Okay. Or if you're on the other side of that, so someone's asking you for directions, advice, and prices. So you may be, in this case, the customer or the server. Okay. And obviously, just this sort of sense of in social occasions, we're inquiring about other people's interests, experiences, future plans, family, things like that. And it's important that we're not just asking those, but we're actually understanding, being able to ask relevant follow-up questions to this. Okay. Um, these information gap activities also teach important soft skills, and we've talked about soft skills in previous webinars. And these are the most important ones that we're looking at are communication skills, obviously. Okay. Things like problem solving, teamwork and collaboration, critical thinking, adaptability, cultural awareness, empathy and patience, time management, negotiation and persuasion, leadership and initiative. So these are things that you need to be working with other people to learn these skills, to develop these skills, and therefore an information gap mimics this sort of interaction that you'll have when you need to do that in the future in real situations. how can we use this information gap? The easiest way to plan this activity, and I mean, we've got a few activities that are already some ideas for you, but if you're planning one from scratch, the best way to do it, plan it, is to think in three stages. Okay. So, first of all, what's the information that student A needs to get from student B? And obviously, we're going to be talking vice versa too. We're not just going to have uh, one student asking for the information, but ideally they need information from each other. Okay, so it's cooperation. The second is, how can they do that? What is the target language? What language will they need to use? What language do we want them to develop? And what language can we give them some scaffolding, some support for? Okay. And this is the thing that I was referring to before, the important information is, what will they need to do with this information? It's not enough just to give them the first two steps and say, you need to find this out, you need to find this out, and then say, okay, everyone found that out, let's pass to another activity, because it's not really motivating for them. And you're not going to be able to see if that activity was done. Okay? So let's look at these stages individually. I can't hear you, Ruth. I think you're on mute.
Now I'm back. Sorry. So, how do we plan a simple information gap activity? I think it's very important. The aspect that Josh mentioned earlier is that transactional aspect of communication. Okay, I want something from you, you want something from me. So, how are we going to manage this? Okay, and we can do it in two different ways. The first one would be to give each student some information that the other one lacks. Okay, so like if you see this example, it's very clear here. So student A has some information about these family members and B different information. So we know, for example, that Ken is funny, but we don't know when he was born, if I am student A, or if he's an uncle, a father, we have no idea. That is information that B has. So these two students need to talk together to be able to collect the information they're missing. Okay? The other one is just basically use the students' knowledge, output, interests, hobbies. They can ask each other about these things. And a simple way to do this would be to put two students together at the beginning of a lesson. So, when you're about to start and you ask them, so what did you do at the weekend? It just becomes a little bit draining when they have to speak about their weekend and the other one is listening. And there is very limited student talking time. Whereas if they're talking in pairs, you're maximizing that student talking time. Okay? So they're going to be explaining to each other what they did at the weekend, and when they report back, they have to pay attention. They need to listen to their partner because they're not going to talk about themselves. They're going to talk about what they remember about their partner. And this implies things that we constantly try and teach. That S in the third person singular when we ask about the present. Those past verbs that might not be the one they are used to hearing. The activities they do is something else. So we can actually help them practice in a very meaningful way.
A simple way to think of this is sort of like the difference between you asking the students what they did at the weekend and you telling each student to find out from someone else what they did at the weekend and then report that back to you. Or not just to you, but to the whole class. Okay. It's really that simple. And I think, we can really cut down on teacher speaking time, give the students a lot more speaking time and listening time. If they're telling us about their weekend, then we're not sure whether the other students are really listening. Okay. But if they know that they're going to have to relate this information back to the teacher, to the class, then they're really going to have a motivation for listening to it. So how can we get the students to use the information gap? Okay. With multilingual classes, it can really, it can be really as easy as putting two students together to make them speak English. Okay, so in the sense that if I have a Chinese student and a Spanish student, I would imagine that in most situations, at least with younger students, the common language they're going to have if they're in your classes is English. Okay, but often we find ourselves in situations where this isn't the case. We have monolingual classes, so a lot of our participants here will be teaching Italian students, or if not all native Italian students, at least students who have Italian in common, okay, as well as in English. Okay. And therefore, what we really need to think is why would they really speak English when they share a common language, okay, that they speak fluently? Okay. The key is getting students to use the target language, especially at low levels. The key is to put it on the board, give them this scaffolding. You can take it away later. Okay. You can rub it out at higher levels. You can just put certain parts of the language on there. You can give them suggestions, things like that. But at lower levels, put it on there. Okay, it's not a problem. Okay, it's just enough to get them speaking it and using it. Okay, um, so write it on the board or give it to your students in some way. Okay. At mid levels, as I said, these students could be presented in some sort of skeleton form. Okay. So, the question word, the verb, the time. Again, you should have some idea of what level your students are and what sort of the support they need and the support they don't need. Okay. And again, monitoring is really important there. So if you're in the class, you'll be going around while the students are asking each other. Okay, you can go around and make sure they're speaking in English. One way that I remember when I was beginning as a teacher, I had someone observing me who suggested that instead of putting them in pairs just close, where, with a big class, you can monitor some students at one side of the class, but on the other side, they might be doing it in Italian. Separate the students, put them 2 meters apart. Okay. The sound of the class, okay, obviously it might become a little bit noisy, but as long as that's not disturbing nearby classes, it can be useful in the sense that, it's they're not always going to be right next to people when they're talking to people. If you're talking in a busy train station or something like that, or a restaurant, you're often, a meter or two away from the person you're speaking to. Okay. This way, it sort of makes their speaking a bit more public, and therefore you can you'll notice immediately when they're switching into to another language that isn't the target language, isn't English in this case.
I think it's also
Um,
important, George, what you mentioned earlier. So when students have a purpose to speak and to listen, that also motivates them to do it in English. So if you give them a mission, as Josh mentioned earlier, so they're going to have to report back to class, or they're going to have to do something with that information, or simply, for example, what did you do at the weekend? So you're going to be talking to each other, and you need to find who is the person who did something different. Generally, among teenagers, they tend to do the same activities, so they're going to be trying to spot something that someone did that is different from the rest, for example. So if you give them a purpose, it always, encourages them to keep it in English.
I mean, this is something that I think we'll be looking at later too, is that you can emphasize the differences. You can say to the students, find someone who did something different to you at the weekend, or find someone who not just likes the same music as you, or likes the same films, or whatever it is, sports, but someone who's got something different, and find more about that. Okay. So a key stage of the information gap activity, and as I said before, one that's too often forgotten, is that feedback stage. To motivate students to do the activity, you must make it clear to all that after they've given this information, it's not the end of the activity. Okay? they have to use it in some way. Okay. Um, a simple example may be, that after they've asked each other about their weekend, now they have to tell the class what their partner did. Okay. Or it could even be in you pair them up with someone else. Okay. And so now they've got to work out if the other person they're speaking to did the same thing as the other person. So, you can do this quite easily by putting the students in two lines and making them move down one. Okay. A little bit like what we've looked at before as speed dating activities in some other webinars. Okay. And we can check, and this is really important too, to check with that partner to see if that information is correct. Okay. So when the students report what they did at the weekend, you can say, okay, is that true? Okay, what was the film you saw at the cinema? Okay. Um, Without this final step, there's really no reason that students will feel the need to ask their partner for information. Look, it may work once or twice. It may work the first time you do it if you forget it. Okay? But pretty soon, the students are going to realize that they're not being checked on this. Okay? And it's they've got no motivation to do it. Okay, so they can just write down anything or not ask questions or just write down invent what they want. Okay. Um, so what can we try? Some activities to try. Okay. So as I talked about before, okay, the simplest thing with a new class or even a class that's coming back after the break is ask them instead of asking them to introduce themselves, ask them to interview a classmate and present this person to the class. Find out something interesting about this student. Okay, what is something that is unusual about this student or that's different to you about this student, and introduce them. Okay, the classic game of 20 questions. Okay, so the students have to guess an object or celebrity using only 20 questions, using only yes or no questions. Okay, so not questions like, where do you find this object? But, do you find this object in the house? Do you find the object in a shop? Okay, things like this. Okay, so you can get them working at that, and then at the end they have to report what the object was. Okay. Something that I'm sure a lot of teachers will be familiar with. They probably it's quite a common thing to do this when we're talking about food, is and also requests, polite requests. So it can be something that goes together. Is a restaurant role play. So one student's the waiter, who has a menu, or who reads the menu to the students. The others are the diners. Okay, give each diner a dietary need too, if you want to make it more difficult. Okay, so one's vegetarian, one's celiac, or a preference. You prefer to eat meat, you prefer to eat pasta, and then ask them to plan their meal. Okay, you could also ask each student has to make some request about the meal. Okay, so they want something on the side, or they want to see if it's possible to have this the hamburger without the salad, okay, or without the cheese. Okay. Um, what can be fun too is add to the waiter that they only have one portion of each dish. So once one person has ordered the meat, if someone else wanted the meat, then they've got to give the other options, and therefore the other person's got to do it. Okay. Um, and then swap those roles around. Once you've had some students being the waiter, now they can become the diner. Okay, and you could try changing the menu. Okay, again, this can be incorporated into a much longer task too, where students might have to write the menu or write about sort of what foods they would order if that was on the menu. Okay. Um, Create a comic strip. A lot of these activities too, if you want to, if you can find on some of the links on our handout, we have some things that are already pre-prepared here. So create a comic strip. divide the panel of the comic strip among the students, each having part of the story. So in this case, some have the first one, some have the second one, some have the third one. Okay. Or, more. And then they have to, instead of showing it, they have to describe it to the other students. And then together with, again, without looking at them, they have to put them in order. Okay. If you want to make this, to ensure that they're not showing the other students, one very easy thing is to put paste, not paste, but stick on one side of the classroom one of the panels, on another the other panel. Okay, and the students can go only to one of them. Okay, this is a sort of way to make sure that they don't have them in front of them. No one has them in front of them. Okay. Can be a fun little activity for them to do, get them walking around the classroom, okay, and coming back together to talk. Again, you could even, if it's not too big, they might even have to stay next to that one and talk across the class.
I think with information gap activities, Josh, instructions are key. I think that's setting it up has to it comes down to good instructions, and ICQs work well, okay, because they're very simple activities. One has a piece of information, the other one lacks that information. So just simple questions like, can you show your picture? No. Is it secret? Yes. You need to speak. But then again, if your students don't follow instructions, also your idea of putting it up on the wall also works because they have to memorize. And when they're activating their memory, they're also trying to remember in English. And that is a really good thing. That definitely enhances their
Yeah, this is
skills
true.
of
Like
long-term memory.
sometimes what I've done is I've stuck something up on the wall. They can go and look at it, but they can't talk until they sit down at their desk.
Exactly.
Okay? And so they have to have a look at it, try to memorize some details, sit down. And again, maybe they can get up and go several times. If they want to check more information, they can come and go. But you could even, if you want to, you could even put it on the thing. They have to lift up a piece of paper to see it so that they can't even see it if they're sitting down. Okay. Again, it might seem, a lot of preparation, but I don't think in the end it's just a little piece of blue tack or something like that, a couple of pins in the wall. Okay. And it can be really fun, okay, for them to do this. Let us know in the chat too if you've done any of these information gaps, not just these ones, but other ones. I'm sure a lot of teachers will have done them, have without maybe even thinking about this being the information gap.
Then reading activities when our teenagers find it really hard to read and concentrate because they're not used to reading anymore. So if you put it up on the wall and they have to read it and then report back, they're actually making an effort to remember that English. That is really important. Rosanna says that to practice the present continuous. Definitely. I think we've all practiced the present continuous with teaching to the information gap. Picture description. I think this one works really well. Some of you may work with younger kids, lower levels. One student has a picture and then has to describe it to the other student. They don't have to show it. They keep it a secret. And the other student has to draw it. And this can be good for teaching colors, prepositions of place, objects, unusual objects. And with lower levels, it works really well because kids tend to really like drawing. And with
This can be
higher
one.
levels and older kids, it is really good fun because some of them really cannot draw and it becomes like a really funny activity.
It's a bit like that game I used to play when I was young, the board game, or I don't know if it's a board game, but like Guess Who, where you have a range of people, you're sort of doing
Yeah.
this, trying to work out who committed the crime. Okay? These
Mhm.
sort of things, the same sort of things that kids play just for fun when they're young. Yeah. And again, if you wanted, again, to make sure they're not sharing these, put the picture on the opposite side of the room so they have to go over and look at it. Okay.
Exactly. Spot the difference. That's another really good one. Okay, you can simply Google spot the difference and then you print off the pictures. Okay, you don't have to create them yourself.
Let
And
us know in the chat if you can spot the differences in these pictures.
these, again, student A has one picture, student B has the other picture. They just need to talk to each other to see what the differences are in the pictures, between the pictures. So, prepositions, definitely clock, time, and numbers. How many candles? What time is it in the picture? Um, Works really, really well. Three bananas in the second picture.
In this way
Definitely.
too, obviously we're looking at the two pictures and we can immediately identify what's similar and what's different. But when you've got students that they can't see each other's, they've got to go through a lot of stuff. They've got to say, is there a cake on the table? Is there how many bananas are there? How many apples are there? How many strawberries are there? Things like that, and you're really getting a lot of great language there. Okay, and
Quantifiers, yes.
again, getting them if you wanted, you could restrain them to yes or no questions. So do it a bit like 20 questions too. So, are there two apples? Are there two bananas? So instead of just saying how many, okay, or where is this person, you need to say, is the girl, or is the cat next to the chair? Okay, these sort of things.
We've got a few comments in the chat. Yes, they can ask questions. You can focus it on that. And it is suitable for different levels and it requires different skills. Yes. And yes, you can totally spot the differences in the chat. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think
Um,
remember that there's these sort of spot the difference pictures. They're really easy to find on the web, things like that. And all you need to do is just get them and now them into two. And again, you don't necessarily even need to give each student's a copy. You can just put a copy on one side of the wall, of
exactly.
a copy on one side of the room, another copy on the other side of the room, and again get them to go up, look at them, and they can't speak until they come back to their desks. Again, I like these sort of kinetic sort of activities where the students get moving. It really gets them sort of awake.
Absolutely. You've just answered one of the questions in the chat, Josh. So another thing, another activity would be a class survey. I particularly like these ones because we're talking about authenticity. Yeah, it is about what they do, they like, clothes they wear, their pets. It's about their authentic real life. So you give each student a topic and they have to write a series of survey questions. They do have to write questions, which helps you focus on question forms, for example. And then you divide the class in two, and each member of each group interviews the other members. Okay? You could give loads of different topics. They can distribute different topics among one big group. So you've got part of the class is half of the class is A, the other half is B. You give them, they decide on topics, you allocate the topics, and then they write different questions and they can ask each other. So at the end, that feedback, very important, as Josh said, they're doing this for a purpose. Okay, so they're going to have to report back all that data, and that's going to require a lot of linguistic skills and communication skills while they're actually interacting with each other. Um, and then the teacher can check asking in groups, in open class. You can do it in various ways, but it is important to get that feedback from the information they have collected.
In a previous webinar, which I've linked to in the handout, we talked about this as part of a longer activity in class too. So even afterwards, you could start them, writing the questions. then you can put them there with the survey. Afterwards, they could even graph or compile this data into some sort of form. So it can really be part of a longer activity and or a project even where they need to work on the data and present it in some interesting way. Um, just to conclude, okay, the information gap is more than just a useful idea. It really can transform a simple activity into an interactive, involving task. Okay, so um, think of when you get these sort of reading tasks or speaking tasks, see if you can make them into some sort of student-centered activity, teaching soft skills, negotiation, even sort of this collaboration and social skills. Okay, that a simple activity that maybe your textbook has as just a sort of exercise to do on paper can be really become a fun speaking activity in person. Okay? These activities are great because they mix speaking and listening. Too often we get the students speaking without really expecting the students to pay attention to what the others are saying. So in this case, we put the responsibility on the students to listen, and therefore they have to really pay attention to what the others are saying. And then if you want, you can they can even have to write it down, okay, as in the survey. They had to write it down, then maybe have to compile this into a more complex report on what they found out. Okay, again, this can be really good for higher level students too. Writing reports, getting data is very much activities that can really be useful for work skills and things like this. Okay. Um, these activities naturally move from low pressure pair work to public speaking. That is the feedback. So it starts out where they're just in two, okay, rather than saying to a new student who comes into class, introduce you to the whole class, which can be a really, really hard thing, something that, they get very nervous about doing. Okay. Put them in pairs, someone else can introduce them. They speak together first. They get to practice their language together before they have to speak in front of the whole group. Okay. And again, they give students a motivation to ask questions. Okay. We're not just saying ask the other person a question. Okay. We're actually mimicking real life use where I might need to find out some information and pass it on to Ruth. Okay, rather than just just saying what I know already. Okay. Anyway, that brings us to the end of our webinar. If you have any idea for future webinars or areas for us to develop, please let us know. We've got lots of ideas coming up, but we would welcome some more. And thanks for your attention. Thank you, Ruth, for helping me with this webinar. And everyone will receive your certificate of participation by email soon. That'll come also with a handout with all this information from the slides and a lot more, including useful links that you can find out more about the information gap and useful exercises and materials that you can print out. Okay. If you don't find it, check your spam, but you can always contact me at Formazione and I'll get that to you. Okay. If you haven't received any from previous webinars too, let me know by emailing me at Formazione. Okay. Our next webinar will be next week, and my colleague's going to be speaking about using sport in the English classroom or topics of sport. So another theme that I think students will really enjoy. Okay, something that they're interested in their free time can be brought into the English classroom. Okay. Thanks a lot, everyone, and thanks a lot, Ruth, for joining me.
Thank you.
Okay.
Have a good evening. Bye bye.